As you all know, DIY is a huge part of this channel. It helps me do things on a budget, such as build aquariums. Knowing how to construct and repair them is a great skill to have in this hobby. After all, the enclosure is what houses everything we do. Building them yourself can save you a lot of money, but there is a caveat. If you're working with acrylic, you typically need a lot of power tools to machine it and solvents to assemble it. As for glass, which I personally think is preferable, you need to know how to cut it. I've been DIYing for many years now. Because of that, I often lose sight of the skills that I've developed over the years, such as cutting glass. I've shown this on the channel countless times before, and truthfully it's become easy for me. That said, I know it can be daunting for someone unfamiliar with the process. I mean, let's be real, glass is fragile, can break, and cause injury. So fear of working with it is completely understandable. However, you probably still want one of those beautiful rimless aquariums at a decent price. I don't know about you, but I'm not trying to spend $200 or more on a 20-gallon aquarium. I've been trying to find a solution around this for a while now, and I finally did. So without any further delay, I'll show you how to make beautiful rimless aquariums like these at a serious discount without cutting a single piece of glass. Let's get to work. You'll only need a few things to build your aquarium, first of which is silicone. In times past, I primarily used GE Silicone 1. It used to cost around $4 a tube, so it was always one of the cheapest options. However, nowadays, it's about $10 a tube, which is nearly the same cost as everything else. Plus, I'm liking the look of black silicone these days, so for my build, I'm going to use this ASI silicone, which is only about $1 more. Either way, you should only need one for this build, unless you're making multiple tanks. Regardless, there are plenty of options out there, so look around. You'll also need a caulk gun to apply the silicone. You could get a basic one like this for around $5, so they're fairly inexpensive. If you want to do more work though, I'd recommend getting an industrial one like this or an electronic one. Having the no drip feature is also really helpful. Otherwise, you'll have to press the trigger on the back after applying each bead. Next is masking tape. Using this is the easiest way to get clean and consistent beads of silicone. I've used various tapes for this process, but the two I prefer the most are frog tape and Scotch Delicate Surface tape. In my opinion, these tapes have the perfect amount of tack. They stick to the glass while also being easy to remove. Sure, I'll use the blue painter's tape if that's all I have, but it sticks a little more than I like. In addition to that, you'll need a razor or two, paper towels, and isopropyl alcohol. I prefer to use at least 70% isopropyl because it evaporates quickly. All of these will aid in the cleanup process as you work. The last material that you'll need for construction is obviously glass. It took me a while to find a set of pieces that would fit together without any cutting, but IKEA of all places had the solution. Though you trust that glass shelves will work perfectly. At 1/4 of an inch thick, they're pretty sturdy. The edges are polished as well, so they're completely safe to handle. The final detail worth noting is that the glass is tempered. This means that it's been heat treated, which makes it stronger than regular annealed glass. A lot of the time, manufactured aquariums include a tempered piece on the bottom for this very reason. Now, the only drawback to it being tempered though is the tank cannot be drilled. However, that would take away from the ease of this build anyway, and if you're comfortable drilling a tank, you're probably fine to cut glass as well. For proper and easy assembly, we'll first prepare the glass. Ideally, you want a nice flat surface that you can lay everything out on. For me personally, I also like to build it on a piece of paper or cardboard. This is totally optional, but I highly recommend it because it will make the entire process much easier. You'll see more about that later. I also like to check the measurements and label everything. There's nothing worse than applying silicone and then realizing that the sides are oriented incorrectly. Next, we'll apply tape along the edges for the silicone beads. Understanding how the tank's going to go together will help with that though. For instance, you'll see that the bottom and side panels sit behind the front and back panels. This means that we'll have to account for the thickness of the glass and the silicone bead when adding the tape. I typically like to make my silicone beads anywhere from 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch wide. Since the glass is 1/4 inch thick, I'll tape it roughly 3/8 inches from the edges of the glass. It doesn't have to be perfect though, so I'll just eyeball it as I go. Another thing is that having a good pair of scissors to cut the tape will make your edges much cleaner. Anyway, I like to start at the bottom. Here I make sure that the side of the tape is close to the 3/8 inches that I mentioned earlier. However, I don't go quite to 3/8 on the bottom. I'll adjust that with the next piece. Then I take it up the side and cut it off with a little excess. I fold this over to create a little tab, which will make removal much easier. I add the bottom piece next, starting at the corner from before. As I do, I line it up with the edge and account for the proper distance on the bottom. I take this to the other side and cut off the excess, leaving a slight gap like before. I address this with the final piece, which I add just like the first. Again, I create a tab on the end. I follow this process for both the front and back panels. Each panel of glass will have 3 pieces of tape on it, like this one. Now I place them very intentionally, and there's a cool feature because of that. As you saw earlier, each piece of tape is overlapped by the next. This aids in the removal process. Starting with the tab on the first piece allows it to be easily removed. This then lifts the next, and so on. They'll often peel up in a single piece, but it's not a guarantee. Since they're removed in the order they were placed, and to mitigate any confusion, it may be helpful to label them as you go. Additionally, I like to add 2 or 3 pieces of tape to the front of each side. This will make it much easier to anchor it all together once the silicone is added. As for the sides, they aren't covered by anything, as you saw earlier. This means that when we add the tape, we only have to account for the silicone. So we're adding the tape in the same layout as before, only this time, just an 1/8 inch gap is left between the tape and the glass. You could apply tape to the bottom piece as well, but truthfully it's not necessary. You'll never even see it once you add the substrate, so it's just a waste of time and materials. Before we apply the silicone, it's best to clean off all of the edges and the areas that we taped off with isopropyl alcohol. Just douse a paper towel in it and wipe it along the areas we just taped off. Make sure to get the edges and the faces of the glass because this is where the silicone will be applied. The reason we do this is to remove oil and debris that could cause issues with the seal. Applying the silicone is probably the most challenging part of this process. You have to work quick because in about 45 minutes it starts to lose its tackiness and won't really work right. Knowing where and how to place it is key. Most tubes are prepared like the GE silicone, but the ASI is slightly different, so I'll show the process for both. The size of the bead is dictated by the diameter of the tube's opening. Cut it closer to the tip to go smaller and further down to go big. Typically a small to medium-sized bead is ideal. Most silicone guns have a cutter on the handle, but I personally don't like to use them because it's harder to make a precise cut. So I use a utility knife instead. I set the tip of the tube on a flat surface and cut it at a 45-degree angle. This makes application easier because you can hold the gun at a natural angle instead of going straight down. Silicone tubes are usually sealed at the base of the tip, so you have to puncture this in order to use the product. Luckily, most silicone guns also come with a poker for that exact purpose. I try to poke as many holes as possible to reduce resistance. As for the ASI silicone, it comes with an individual tip that screws onto the tube. I cut the tip like before, but to break this seal, you actually have to slice off the end with a blade. To preserve your silicone, just put a piece of duct tape on the end. Before we go and apply this, there's one more thing. If you don't want to get it on your hands, wear some gloves. However, if you do get it on your bare hands, it wipes right off with dry paper towels. Either way, you probably want to keep a roll on standby as you're working. To apply the silicone, it's best to refer back to how the pieces fit together. Some of it will be applied along the edges and some along the faces. I personally think it's easier to add it to the faces, so if you have the option, do that instead. Anyway, for these tanks, we'll primarily add it to the faces other than the front and back edges of the bottom piece. Luckily, it's easy to add in these areas. Otherwise, it will be applied along the top of the bottom piece and within the taped off areas of the front and back pieces. Actually applying it though is different depending on where it's going. We'll start at the bottom piece. I turn the tube so the opening is facing the edge of the glass. Then I slowly apply the silicone along the surface, doing my best to keep it consistent. I repeat this along the back as well. Application to the faces is similar. I turn the tube so its opening faces away from me. Then as I pull the caulk gun across the glass, the bead is built up accordingly. Repeat this 5 more times and it's ready for assembly. Although I said you have to work fast, this is not a race. If you're conscious about each move, the process goes quickly because you're not fixing mistakes. Also, periodically wiping off the tip as you go can help mitigate inconsistencies. As I put this together, I like to work in a circle. I stand up the front and right sides and simultaneously press them into the glass, making sure the corners match up. As I do, I lightly press them into the silicone. The key is not to press it all out. You simply want the glass to rest in it while all being flush on the outside. Then I go back and tape up the corner. The next one is a little different. As I lift up the back and press it into the silicone, I only attach the corner near what's already anchored. The tape and silicone alone should be enough to keep it standing. Then I press the side piece into the front and bottom, like before. Once it's secure, I go and finalize the back piece. I build the tank in this order to minimize the amount of smearing between panels. That said, we've got another bead to apply on the inside. I find it easiest to pull the gun toward me, meaning that I always apply the beads from the inside out. In addition to that, it's important to note that the tip's opening should always face toward the glass. Anyway, I begin in one of the bottom corners, pull it along the side, up and out. Doing it 4 times will get it completely covered. Also, you don't need a lot of silicone here, just enough to build up a proper interior seam. The seam needs smoothed out, and you have options for that. Some people like to use objects like a pen, but I usually like to use my finger. I lightly glide it across the silicone to smooth it out. That said, make sure just to go over the surface without pressing into it. Throughout this process, I make sure to wipe off my finger between each pass so everything remains consistent. From there, we have to remove the tape. Again, follow the order in which you applied them so they pull each other off as you go. After I pull on the tab, I slowly peel it away from the silicone as much as possible. This tends to keep things cleaner. Also, as you're peeling this up, make sure to hold on to the glass so the pieces don't shift. After all of that, the tank is fully assembled, but we gotta let it sit for 24 hours so the silicone can cure. Don't worry about any of it sticking out of the sides or extra mess that you made. We'll clean that up in a little bit. After waiting for the silicone to cure, we're left with this sturdy tank. It needs a little bit of cleanup though. First, we can remove all of the anchoring tape. Next, we can address any mistakes that may have occurred. For the sake of demonstration, I put this bead on the bottom of the tank. With a razor blade, we can easily scrape this off and any other areas of excess. The same goes for anything that pressed out of the seams. These will inevitably occur, but they're easily removed with a razor. Just take your time and keep the blade as parallel to the glass as possible. This will mitigate the possibility of scratching your new tank. This is also when that paper from earlier comes into play. If I would have built this directly on the table, it would be stuck down because of the silicone. Since I did it on paper though, I'm still able to freely move it around. Anyway, I flip it over to scrape it and any excess off with a razor. After that, you may also want to go back with a microfiber cloth and polish off any smudges or fingerprints. Since this is a rimless tank, it sits directly on the surface. Unless the surface is completely flat, which it's probably not, and clear of debris, this is pretty much guaranteed to crack once we fill it with water. Luckily, both are easily remedied by creating a self-leveling mat with some neoprene, EVA foam, or something similar. I usually go with something around 5mm thick, and you could get it online or at various craft stores. For this demonstration, I'm using a roll of EVA foam. I flatten it out and line up the edges of the tank. Then I mark for it with a pencil. I slide it over slightly and cut along the line the best I can, making sure to cut straight down. This will keep it looking clean and ensure the edges aren't angled. The only thing left to do now is a water test. Truthfully, I usually don't even test my tanks anymore unless it's something wacky. I've built so many of them by now, and truthfully, I've never even had a leak. I think that's because I repaired a lot of old tanks prior to even building them from scratch, so the leaks and learning happened before then. Anyway, if you follow the process as I have shown, you shouldn't have any leaks, and now you have a beautiful DIY rimless aquarium. You saw me build this one during the demonstration, but I actually built a second one that's a little bit larger. The smaller of the two holds 24 gallons or 92 liters, while the larger holds 29 gallons or 111 liters. I'm sure you could make many other sizes using this technique, but I didn't have time to go through all of IKEA's glass to find all the possibilities. As I calculated the cost for each, there are a few considerations. First is that the shelves come in sets of 2. Meaning that when you make a tank, you have to buy 2 packs of the larger shelves, which leaves you with an extra piece. I know aquarium people though, and you can't just have one tank. So if you buy another set of shelves, you can make 2 tanks easily. Regardless, I'll put the full price of the shelves in the calculation. Additionally, I built both tanks with a single tube of silicone. Although it only takes a half a tube each, I'll include the full prices for each tank. As for the EVA foam, the rolls I bought were $14.99 each. Again, I was able to use a single roll for both, but I'll factor the cost of an entire roll into each tank. That said, I'll exclude the tape, caulking gun, paper towels, and razor blades from my calculations. You probably already have most of that, and the prices will vary depending on what you choose. Now then, I was able to build the smaller 24-gallon aquarium for $99.96. The larger 29-gallon aquarium, on the other hand, cost $103.96 to build. They're DIY tanks, so there's sure to be some inconsistencies, but at this size and quality, you cannot go wrong. I made these because I need tanks for the new animal room, and it seemed like a good way to go. After all is said and done, I will have made 2 of these and 2 of these, so all in I'll be around $275, which if you ask me is an absolute steal. So for those of you who've wanted to make your own rimless aquariums for a while now, but were afraid of working with glass, now you can do so on a serious budget. I'll leave links to all the products I used down in the video description for your convenience. If you found this video helpful, please leave it with a thumbs up to help support the channel. I've built tanks plenty of times before, but I've never explained the process in this great of detail, sharing my tips and tricks as I go. Also, if you have not yet subscribed and want to see what I do with these in the new space, definitely do so you don't miss out on that. Anyway, that's all I have for you in this one, Serpa Squad. Thank you so much as always for watching. Take care and peace.